Hi everyone. I'm actually really anxious about tonight's stream. Uh-oh. I left monitoring on for my mic. What I can't decide if I should do is if I should whisper for the stream or if I should just speak in a soft voice. I feel like I have probably equal chances of accidentally fading out of either one, so I'm just not really sure, and I'm very curious what you think, chat. Would you prefer to hear whispering, as that's sort of the ASMR thing, or would you prefer just soft-spoken speech? You know, I was talking to my wife, and she said that she would probably just prefer soft-spoken speech. But I'm like I said, I'm really curious. Should I just speak softly, or should I whisper like this? Which of these tickles your fancy? On that note, hello, Lil Yak. Welcome in, Dizzy B, Aurora. You think soft speech sounds more natural? I don't disagree. Dizzy B also thinks soft spoken whispering can be hard to understand. Okay, yeah. I also think that soft spoken is going to be better for. I promised to make an MP3 out of tonight, so any sort of playback soft spoken is going to be much better for, I personally feel. That said, I think it might not technically be ASMR, but I'm also not sure that really matters at the end of the day. Anyway, since I'm anxious to help calm me down and before I get into reading stories, how is everyone? I've greeted you, right? Lil Yak, Dizzy, Aurora, welcome in. But I haven't yet asked you how you're doing. I hope that you've all had a really great day. My day's been pretty great too. You know, I started out tonight before streaming by doing my daily tidy. Now, I did my cut the rope daily this morning because I had sort of a feeling that maybe it's better to get cut the rope daily out of the way early so that when people are searching for solutions, it's there. But I'm not really seeing more views on that than normal, so maybe I was wrong about that. But I didn't do my daily tidy until maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes before stream. And the special thing about my daily tidy today is it's my 100th daily tidy in the game. And I unlocked the very last badge. Aurora, you love the voice? Well, I guess that settles it. Everyone that's currently in chat would prefer soft spoken. So I guess that's what I'm gonna do. Is that ASMR? I don't know. Doesn't matter. It's what the people want. And we're gonna give the people what the people want. Yo, 100 for sure though. Like, I'm really excited about 100 because an anonymous gifter gifted a tier 1 sub to ZR Poke. Thank you so much. Who could it be? Literally no idea. They're anonymous. They could be anyone. Oh, you might notice that for today's stream, I've turned the sound alerts way down, but they are still there. I could just barely hear it over my headphones, although my volume's not up super loud either. But thank you so much for gifting ZR Poke a sub. ZR's a great friend. You know, we're both Queen Rowlet mods. and it's fantastic. So I hope that the next time they're on, they can enjoy these sweet emotes that Queen drew up. I love them so much. I'm especially a fan of the Bulbasaur heart. Like when I got affiliate and I was like, oh my gosh, I need some emotes. I already knew that Queen Rowlet had pre-made emote sets, and I'd seen them before and they were beautiful. So I went right over to her Kofi, her Ko-Fi. I went right over to her Ko-Fi and I was looking. You're right, it's Queen Clover now. Oh no, I'm not supposed to make that mistake. But I went right over. It's gonna be a good one tonight, guys. I went right over to her Ko-Fi and I looked at the two emotes that she'd already made, the grass emotes and the water emotes, and they were so hard to choose from. And then I saw the Bulbasaurs. I had to have the Bulbasaurs. The regular Bulbasaur and the shiny Bulbasaur using their tendrils to make a little heart. It was beautiful. I had to have it. Had to. You know, I don't personally have much hopes of ever getting up to partner level. I mean, maybe because I just started this year, but that doesn't seem like something that's ever going to be in the cards for me. But no matter how big I might ever get, I would definitely have to keep the Bulbasaurs. There's no replacing them. They're excellent. They're going to be there forever. Permanently. Am I staring into your soul yet? They're there forever. Queen does such a good job with emotes. You are not joking. Like, it cannot be overstated how good of a job Queen does with emotes. My mods are slacking a little bit today. We've been talking about Queen for like 5 minutes straight and nobody shouted her out. Gotta do that. It's gotta be done. But yeah. I think it says in. No, it doesn't say in the title. You just typed it. You took too long. Now your candy's gone. That's what happens. Ciao. Bonus points if you get that reference. But I did say in my going live messages on Twitter and Discord, etc., that I am taking viewer requests tonight. So if you have some stories or poems or something that's in the public domain, or is CC0, or hell, if it's CCBY, I'm happy to read those because let's face it, tonight you guys made happen, especially Little Yak. I think Little Yak is really the one who made tonight happen. Toby Hayden, one child. I'll look it up. That's an entire book. Corey Hayden, one child. So that is a memoir published only 43 years ago. So it's not going to be in the public domain and it's not going to be in Creative Commons. So that's not going to be possible for me to read. You know, I'm sorry. I know a lot of YouTubers, a lot of streamers like to sort of skirt copyright law a little bit. I am more of a play by the book kind of guy. So I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to skirt the law around this because, you know, if I had read like one super litigious author or publisher, I could be facing a lawsuit, and that's not worth it. I think you would agree with me. That's just not worth it. But I have plenty of stories. All of Edgar Allan Poe's in the public domain. Dorian Gray's in the public domain. Beowulf. I don't think I can read all of Beowulf tonight. So if you have like a specific section you really like, I'd be happy to. Although, problem with Beowulf is that Beowulf was not written in modern English, so it might be difficult for me to find a public domain copy. But I'll check Project Gutenberg, which is sort of my go-to place for that. Yeah, okay, Project Gutenberg does have a public domain translation of Beowulf. Well, what are we clipping? You know, tonight, in regards to having my clips, I did set up something special wherein I have both. You don't know how clip that works? Clip that just takes the last 30 seconds of video and makes a Twitch clip out of it. And then I can go back, I can look at that. If it's, you know, funny or interesting, I might feature it as one of my clips, or I might post it to TikTok or Instagram. But tonight, I've got something special for Clip That. And probably for every night after tonight, which is I have both a landscape and a portrait canvas running in OBS. So, you know, my poor graphics card is working extra hard tonight. But with Clip That, in addition to Twitch clipping the last 30 seconds of this portrait view that you see here, I'm also taking 30 seconds of this is landscape, I'm sorry, this is not portrait. I'm also taking the last 30 seconds of my portrait canvas, which might be more properly set up for things like posting to TikTok, where it's got sort of the chat behind me. It's going to show the video better, and it should be in higher quality because I'm not going to have to like grab bits and pieces of it. That poor graphics card. Yeah, listen, I like to do a lot of things on my computer. So when I decided that, yeah, a 3070 Ti will be fine, I don't need anything more than that, I was so wrong. I was so wrong. You know, you would think that I shouldn't need a 4090 for doing basic stuff, but with all the stuff that I have running all the time, it seems like maybe what I do need is a 4090, which sounds absolutely insane to me. And I cannot currently afford $1,500 for a graphics card, especially not when I want to spend a couple $100 commissioning Queen. She doesn't know that yet. I don't think she even has rates for what I want to ask if she would be willing to work with me on. So, don't look sad. It's fine. Even if I don't have a 4090, I can still produce great content. We can play Grounded on its lowest settings and it still looks pretty great. So, I don't think it's a problem. You know? And like I said before, the poor graphics card is working so hard. I use NVIDIA's noise cancellation on top of my microphone, so it's working real hard there. And then, of course, any games that are running. There's like 1 billion web views on the canvas that you're seeing right now. There's VTube Studio. There's stream avatars. There's often tits, which I'm not running tits tonight. I thought it'd be too much of a distraction. Will I do Dr. Seuss? I don't think Dr. Seuss is public domain yet. Loyak thinks that there's something I don't think. What do you think that I do not think? You hear that okay? I'm suddenly worried that I didn't set it to monitor because I did not hear it at all. I didn't hear it at all. Let's see here. Stream stickers, not set to monitor. Okay. I've got it set to monitor and output now. But I did think about that. I did turn it down. So that it wouldn't be overpowering. But I'll need to know sort of how loud that was. I'm sorry, Loyak. I am a stickler for quality, or at least I try to be. So I went through my audio mixer, like I have a whole scene collection set up just for tonight. And I went through my audio mixer and I turned down all the notifications so that they would all still have some volume and could all still be heard, but wouldn't be overpowering for anyone that might be listening to this while they fall asleep, anyone who might be listening to the recording and falling asleep. Basically, I wanted to prioritize isn't the word, but I wanted to make sure that this was very well done for anyone who might listen to it and fall asleep. And at least judging by your reaction, I did a good job with that. So I'm proud of it. I don't know what else to say other than that. Let's see. I do have some stories already open. I'm going to check the public domain status of Dr. Seuss, but no. Theodore Geisel's work will not enter the public domain until 2061. So yeah, that's not going to happen. But Aurora, you did mention Beowulf. As Beowulf is an epic, I would ask that you pick maybe like one chapter or two chapters or something that you really like from Beowulf, and I will be happy to read those excerpts. In the interim, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with one of my favorite poems. Just because of the repetition. I love the repetition in this poem. Now, before I get started with the reading part, I do need to warn you, chat, that I will not be responding to chat or even reacting to things like stream stickers while I'm doing a reading, okay? And I'm going to do that so that they can stand alone and they can be used by themselves at some other point. I hope you understand. I hope we still have fun regardless, and I will be doing reactions and chatting with you in between each reading. Sounds good? I'm glad you agree. So let's get started. The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight. Keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. Hear the mellow wedding bells, golden bells. What a world of happiness their harmony foretells. Through the balmy air of night, how they ring out their delight from the molten golden notes, and all in tune, what a liquid ditty floats to the turtle dove that listens while she gloats on the moon. Oh, from out the sounding cells, what a gush of euphony voluminously wells, how it swells, how it dwells on the future, how it tells of the rapture that impels to the swinging and the ringing of the bells, 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 of the bells, 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 to the rhyming and the chiming of the bells. Hear the loud alarum bells, brazen bells, what tale of terror now their turbulency tells in the startled ear of night, how they scream out their affright, too much horrified to speak, they can only shriek, shriek, out of tune, in a clamorous appealing to the mercy of the fire, in a mad expostulation with the deaf and frantic fire, leaping higher, 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 with a desperate desire and a resolute endeavor, now to sit or never by the side of the pale-faced moon. Oh, the bells, 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 what a tale their terror tells of despair. How they clang and clash and roar, what a horror they outpour on the bosom of the palpitating air. Yet the ear it fully knows by the twanging and the clanging how the danger ebbs and flows. Yet the ear distinctly tells in the jangling and the wrangling how the danger sinks and swells by the sinking or the swelling in the anger of the bells, of the bells, of the bells, 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 in the clamor and the clangor of the bells. Hear the tolling of the bells, iron bells, what a world of solemn thought their monody compels. In the silence of the night, how we shiver with affright at the melancholy meaning of their tone. For every sound that floats from the rust within their throats is a groan. And the people, the people, they that dwell up in the steeple, all alone, and who, tolling, tolling, tolling in that muffled monotone, feel a glory in so rolling on the human heart a stone. They are neither man nor woman, they are neither brute nor human, they are ghouls, and their king it is who tolls, and he rolls, 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 rolls. A paean from the bells, and his merry bosom swells with the paean of the bells, and he dances and he yells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the paean of the bells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the throbbing of the bells, 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 to the sobbing of the bells, keeping time, 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 as he knells, 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 in a happy runic rhyme to the rolling of the bells, 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 to the tolling of the bells, 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 to the moaning and the groaning of the bells. Oh yeah, after that I am going to need a quick drink of water. You bitty bun bunny. I will hydrate and I will stretch because tonight I am indeed a little hunched over so that I can be closer to the mic. Bells does not sound like a real word now. I just looked up what that word was the other day because it's not. Oh no, it is. I was looking up what the word was for when it's logographic, but I don't remember semantic. You have been semantically satiated. Let me drink that water now. Welcome in, sarcastic Katie, my love. I hope you are doing well upstairs. As I told the rest of chat, I am taking requests, although I do have yours queued up already. I am back to a normal talking break, yes. To the moaning and the groaning of the bells was the last line, and I gave it a nice long pause there. Let's not use where you from as sort of a message highlight, or I will have to try to raise. Am I going to stick with ASMR or normal reading? I'm going to stay soft spoken tonight because this was an ASMR stream. I'm not going to do whispering. I did ask, and everyone preferred soft spoken over whispering. So I am going to stick with soft spoken tonight. The whispering is the sensory nightmare. Yeah, yeah. I did have some comments that some people couldn't really understand very well when it's whispered text. So I figure soft spoken is just going to have to do, but I am going to try to keep the ASMR format despite that. Good luck, me. I'm going to drink some more water. I did tell my wife, sarcastic Katie, earlier that I was a little worried about tonight because, especially around dinner time, I had a sore throat. And I am a little worried about that, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. It's not sore right now, so it's probably going to be okay. These texts are perhaps longer. Thank you for the ear scritches. Perhaps longer than I initially anticipated. But I think that's going to be fine. So, pardon me. Since I don't have any other requests right yet, um, I'm probably gonna jump into sarcastic Katie's request, which was a story by Edgar Allan Poe. So it's gonna be a lot longer than the poem reading just was. But it is called The Pit and the Pendulum. Now, this is not a story I think I've ever read. So I did trip over a few words in the bells that I wasn't familiar with. So you can expect that that might be happening a little bit more with the Pit and the Pendulum. So, as Lil Yak said, sit down, relax, and enjoy the story. I was sick, sick unto death with that long agony, and when they at length unbound me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence The dreaded sentence of death was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. After that, the sound of the inquisitorial voices seemed merged in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of a mill wheel. This only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more. Yet, for a while I saw, but with how terrible an exaggeration. I saw the lips of the black-robed judges. They appeared to me white, whiter than the sheet upon which I trace these words, and thin even to grotesqueness, thin with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw that the decrees of what to me was fate were still issuing from those lips. I saw them writhe with a deadly locution. I saw them fashion the syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound succeeded. I saw, too, for a few moments of delirious horror, the soft and nearly imperceptible waving of the sable draperies which enwrapped the walls of the apartment. And then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first, they wore the aspect of charity and seemed white and slender angels who would save me. But then, all at once, there came a most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fiber in my frame thrill as if I had touched the wire of a galvanic battery, while the angel forms became meaningless specters with heads of flame, and I saw that from them there would be no help. And then there stole into my fancy, like a rich musical note, the thought of what sweet rest there must be in the grave. Thought came gently and stealthily, and it seemed long before it attained full appreciation, but just as my spirit came at length properly to feel and entertain it, the figures of the judges vanished, as if magically, from before me. The tall candles sank into nothingness. Their flames went out utterly. The blackness of darkness supervened. All sensations appeared swallowed up in a mad rushing descent as of the soul into Hades. Then silence and stillness, night were the universe. I had swooned, but still will not say that all of consciousness was lost. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define or even to describe, yet all was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no, in delirium, no, in a swoon, no, in death, no. Even in the grave, all is not lost, else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from the most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream. Yet, in a second afterward, so frail may that web have been, we remember not that we have dreamed. In the return to life from the swoon, there are 2 stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical existence. It seems probable that if, Upon reaching the second stage, we could recall the impressions of the first. We should find these impressions eloquent in memories of the gulf beyond. And that gulf is what? How, at least, shall we distinguish its shadows from those of the tomb? But if the impressions of what I have termed the first stage are not at will recalled, yet after long interval do they not come unbidden while we marvel whence they come? He who has never swooned is not he who finds strange palaces and wildly familiar faces in coals that glow, is not he who beholds floating in mid-air the sad visions that the many may not view, is not he who ponders over the perfume of some novel flower, is not he whose brain grows bewildered with the meaning of some musical cadence which has never before arrested his attention. Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amid earnest struggles to regather some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there have been moments which I have dreamed of success. There have been brief, very brief periods when I have conjured up remembrances which the lucid reason of a later epoch assures me could have had reference only to that condition of seeming unconsciousness. These shadows of memory tell indistinctly of tall figures that lifted and bore me in silence down, down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppressed me at the mere idea of the interminableness of the descent. They tell also of a vague horror at my heart on account of that heart's unnatural stillness. Then comes a sense of sudden motionlessness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly train, had outrun in their descent the limits of the limitless and paused from the wearisomeness of their toil. After this, I call to mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness, the madness of a memory which busies itself among forbidden things. Very suddenly, there came back to my soul motion and sound, the tumultuous motion of the heart, and in my ears the sound of its beating. Then a pause in which all is blank. Then again sound and motion and touch, a tingling sensation pervading my frame. Then the mere consciousness of existence, without thought, a condition which lasted long. Then, very suddenly, thought and shuddering terror and earnest endeavor to comprehend my true state. Then a strong desire to lapse into insensibility. Then a rushing revival of soul and a successful effort to move. And now a full memory of the trial, of the judges, of the sable draperies, of the sentence, of the sickness, of the swoon. Then entire forgetfulness of all that followed, of all that a later day and much earnestness of endeavor have enabled me vaguely to recall. So far, I had not opened my eyes. I felt that I lay upon my back, unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. There I suffered it to remain for many minutes while I strove to imagine where and what I could be. I longed yet dared not to employ my vision. I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but that I grew aghast lest there should be nothing to see. At length, with a wild desperation at heart, I quickly unclosed my eyes. My worst thoughts then were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled for breath. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly and made effort to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings and attempted from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet, for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a supposition, notwithstanding what we read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with real existence. But where and in what state was I? The condemned to death, I knew, perished usually at the autos de fe, and one of these had been held on the very night of the day of my trial. Had I been remanded to my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months? This I at once saw could not be. Victims had been in immediate demand. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as all the condemned cells at Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether excluded. A fearful idea now suddenly drove the blood in torrents upon my heart, and for a brief period I once more relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet, trembling convulsively in every fiber. I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step lest I should be impeded by the walls of a tomb. Perspiration burst from every pore and stood in cold big beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew at length intolerable, and I cautiously moved forward with my arms extended and my eyes straining from their sockets in the hope of catching some faint ray of light. I proceeded for many paces, but still all was blackness and vacancy. I breathed more freely. It seemed evident that mine was not, at least, the most hideous of fates. And now, as I still continued to step cautiously onward, there came thronging upon my recollection 1,000 vague rumors of the horrors of Toledo. Of the dungeons there had been strange things narrated, fables I had always deemed them, but yet strange and too ghastly to repeat, save in a whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in this subterranean world of darkness, or what fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death of more than customary bitterness, I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. My outstretched hands at length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall, seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all the careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means of ascertaining the dimensions of my dungeon, as I might make its circuit and return to the point whence I set out without being aware of the fact. So perfectly uniform seemed the wall. I therefore sought the knife which had been in my pocket, which led into the inquisitorial chamber, but it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of coarse serge. I had thought of forcing the blade in some minute crevice of the masonry so as to identify my point of departure. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial, although in the disorder of my fancy it seemed at first insuperable. I tore a part of the hem from the robe and placed the fragment at full length and at right angles to the wall. In groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit. So at least I thought, but I had not counted upon the extent of the dungeon or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time when I stumbled and fell. My excessive fatigue induced me to remain prostrate, and sleep soon overtook me as I lay. Upon awakening and stretching forth an arm, I found beside me a loaf and a pitcher with water. I was too much exhausted to reflect upon this circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterward, I resumed my tour around the prison, and with much toil came at last upon the fragment of the serge. Up to the period when I fell, I had counted 52 paces, and upon resuming my walk, I had counted 48 more when I arrived at the rag. There were in all then 100 paces, and, admitting 2 paces to the yard, I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in circuit. I had met, however, with many angles in the wall, and thus I could form no guess at the shape of the vault, for vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object, certainly no hope these researches, but a vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. At first, I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly of solid material, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in as direct a line as possible. I had advanced some 10 or 12 paces in this manner when the remnant of the torn hem of my robe became entangled between my legs. I stepped on it and fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance, which yet, in a few seconds afterward, and while I still lay prostrate, arrested my attention. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips and the upper portion of my head, although seemingly at a less elevation than the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm and shuddered to find that I had fallen at the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent, of course, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm in its descent. At length there was a sullen plunge into water, succeeded by loud echoes. At the same moment there came a sound resembling the quick opening and as rapid closing of a door overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom, and as suddenly faded away. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped. Another step before my fall, and the world had seen me no more. And the death just avoided was of that very character which I had regarded as fabulous and frivolous in the tales respecting the Inquisition. To the victims of its tyranny, there was the choice of death with its direct physical agonies, or death with its most hideous moral horrors. I had been reserved for the latter. By long suffering, my nerves had been unstrung until I trembled at the sound of my own voice, and had become in every respect a fitting subject for the species of torture which awaited me. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall, resolving there to perish rather than risk the terrors of the wells, of which my imagination now pictured many in various positions about the dungeon. In other conditions of mind, I might have had courage to end my misery at once by a plunge into one of these abysses, but now I was the veriest of cowards. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Agitation of spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered. Upon arousing, I found by my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. It must have been drugged, for scarcely had I drunk before I became irresistibly drowsy. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long it lasted, of course, I know not, but when once again I unclosed my eyes, the objects around me were visible. By a wild, sulphurous luster, the origin of which I could not at first determine, I was enabled to see the extent and aspect of the prison. In its size, I had been greatly mistaken. The whole circuit of its walls did not exceed 25 yards. For some minutes this fact occasioned me a world of vain trouble. Vain indeed, for what could be of less importance under the terrible circumstances which environed me than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? But my soul took a wild interest in trifles, and I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurement. The truth at length flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I had counted 52 paces up to the period when I fell. I must then have been within a pace or two of the fragment of surge. In fact, I had nearly performed the circuit of the vault. I then slept, and upon awakening, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing the circuit nearly double what it actually was. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began my tour with the wall to the left and ended it with the wall to the right. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure. In feeling my way, I had found many angles and thus deduced an idea of great irregularity. So potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing from lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions or niches at odd intervals. The general shape of the prison was square. What I had taken for masonry seemed now to be iron or some other metal in huge plates whose sutures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all the hideous and repulsive devices to which the charnel superstition of the monks has given rise. The figures of fiends in aspects of menace, with skeleton forms and other more really fearful images, overspread and disfigured the walls. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but that the colors seemed faded and blurred, as if from the effects of a damp atmosphere. I now noticed the floor, too, which was of stone. In the center yawned the circular pit from whose jaws I had escaped, but it was the only one in the dungeon. All this I saw indistinctly and by much effort, for my personal condition had been greatly changed during slumber. I now lay upon my back and at full length on a species of low framework of wood. To this I was securely bound by a long strap resembling a circingle. It passed in many convolutions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm to such extent that I could, by dint of much exertion, supply myself with food from an earthen dish which lay by my side on the floor. I saw, to my horror, that the pitcher had been removed. I say to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst, it appeared to be, the design of my persecutors to stimulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead, and constructed much as the side walls. In one of its panels, a very singular figure riveted my whole attention. It was the painted figure of Time, as he is commonly represented, save that, in lieu of a scythe, he held what, at a casual glance, I supposed to be the picture image of a huge pendulum such as we see on antique clocks. There was something, however, in the appearance of this machine which caused me to regard it more attentively. While I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own, I fancied that I saw it in motion. In an instant afterward, the fancy was confirmed. Its sweep was brief and, of course, slow. I watched it for some minutes, somewhat in fear, but more in wonder. Wearied at length with observing its dull movement, I turned my eyes upon the other objects in the cell. A slight noise attracted my notice, and, looking to the floor, I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the well which lay just within view to my right. Even then, while I gazed, they came up in troops, hurriedly, with ravenous eyes, allured by the scent of the meat. From this, it required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time, before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that had perceptibly descended. I now observed, with what horror it is needless to say, that its nether extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel, about a foot in length from horn to horn, the horns upward, and the under edge evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor also, it seemed massy and heavy, tapering from the edge into a solid and broad structure above. It was appended to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by monkish ingenuity and torture. My cognizance of the pit had become known to the inquisitorial agents. The pit whose horrors had been destined for so bold a recusant as myself. The pit, typical of hell and regarded by rumor as the ultima thule of all their punishments. The plunge into this pit I had avoided by the merest of accidents. I knew that surprise or entrapment into torment formed an important portion of all the grotesquerie of these dungeon deaths. Having failed to fall, it was no part of the demon plan to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, there being no alternative, a different and a milder destruction awaited me. Milder! I half smiled in my agony as I thought of such application of such a term. What boots it to tell of the long, long hours of horror more than mortal, during which I counted the rushing vibrations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with a descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages, down and down, and still down it came. Days passed. It might have been that many days passed ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its acrid breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed. I wearied heaven with my prayer for its more speedy descent. I grew frantically mad and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I fell suddenly calm and lay smiling at the glittering death and as a child at some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was brief, for, upon again lapsing into life, there had been no perceptible descent in the pendulum. But it might have been long, for I knew there were demons who took note of my swoon and who could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very, inexpressibly sick and weak, as if through long inanition. Even amid the agonies of that period, the human nature craved food. With painful effort, I outstretched my left arm as far as my bonds permitted, and took possession of the small remnant which had been spared me by the rats. As I put a portion of it within my lips, there rushed to my mind a half-formed thought of joy, of hope. Yet, what business had I with hope? It was, as I say, a half-formed thought. Man has many such which are never completed. I felt that it was of joy, of hope, but felt also that it had perished in its formation. In vain I struggled to perfect, to regain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulum was at right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of the heart. It would fray the serge of my robe. It would return and repeat its operations again and again, notwithstanding terrifically wide sweep, some 30 feet or more, and the hissing vigor of its descent, sufficient to sunder these very walls of iron. Still, the fraying of my robe would be all that, for several minutes, it would accomplish. And at this thought I paused. I dared not go farther than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with a pertinacity of attention, as if, in so dwelling, I could arrest here the descent of the steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the peculiar thrilling sensation which the friction of cloth produces on the nerves. I pondered upon all this frivolity until my teeth were on edge. Down, steadily down it crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in contrasting its downward with its lateral velocity, to the right, to the left, far and wide, with the shriek of a damned spirit, to my heart with the stealthy pace of the tiger. I alternately laughed and howled as the one or the other idea grew predominant. Down, certainly, relentlessly down, it vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the latter from the platter beside me to my mouth with great effort, but no farther. Could I have broken the fastenings above the elbow, I would have seized and attempted to arrest the pendulum. I might as well have attempted to arrest an avalanche. Down, still unceasingly, still inevitably down, I gasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its every sweep. My eyes followed it outward or upward whirls with the eagerness of the most unmeaning despair. They closed themselves spasmodically at the descent, although death would have been a relief. Oh, how unspeakable. Still, I quivered in every nerve to think how slight a sinking of the machinery would precipitate that keen, glistening axe upon my bosom. It was hope that prompted the nerve to quiver, the frame to shrink. It was hope, the hope that triumphs on the rack, that whispers to the death condemned, even in the dungeons of the Inquisition. I saw that some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe, and with this observation there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen, collected calmness of despair. For the first time during many hours, or perhaps days, I thought. It now occurred to me that the bandage or surcingle which enveloped me was unique. I was tied by no separate cord. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent athwart any portion of the band would so detach it that it might be unwound from my person by means of my left hand. But how fearful in that case the proximity of the steel. The result of the slightest struggle, how deadly. Was it likely, moreover, that the minions of the torturer had not foreseen and provided for this possibility? Was it probable that the bandage crossed my bosom in the track of the pendulum? Dreading to find my feint and, as it seemed, in last hope frustrated, I so far elevated my head as to obtain a distinct view of my breast. The surcingle enveloped my limbs and body close in all directions, save in the path of the destroying crescent. Scarcely had I dropped my head back into its original position when there flashed upon my mind what I cannot better describe than as the unformed half of that idea of deliverance to which I have previously alluded, and of which a moiety only floated indeterminately through my brain when I raised food to my burning lips. The whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once with the nervous energy of despair to attempt its execution. For many hours, the immediate vicinity of the low framework upon which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if they waited but for motionlessness on my part to make me their prey. To what food, I thought, have they been accustomed in the well? They had devoured, in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but a small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into an habitual seesaw or wave of the hand above the platter, and at length the unconscious uniformity of the movement deprived it of effect. In their voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs in my fingers. With the particles of the oily and spicy viand which now remained, I thoroughly rubbed the bandage wherever I could reach it. Then, raising my hand from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. first, the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change, at the cessation of movement. They shrank alarmedly back. Many sought the well, but this was only for a moment. I had not counted in vain upon their voracity. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leaped upon the framework and smelt at the surcingle. This seemed the signal for a general rush. Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood, they overran it and leaped in hundreds upon my person. The measured movement of the pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed, they swarmed upon me in ever accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat, their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging pressure. Disgust, for which the world has no name, swelled my bosom and chilled with a heavy clamminess my heart. Yet 1 minute, and I felt that the struggle would be over. Plainly, I perceived the loosening of the bandage. I knew that in more than one place it must be already severed. With a more than human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred in my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. I at length felt that I was free. The surcingle hung in ribbons from my body, but the stroke of the pendulum already pressed upon my bosom. It had divided the serge of the robe, it had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of escape had arrived. At a wave of my hand, my deliverers hurried tumultuously away. With a steady movement, cautious, sidelong, shrinking and slow, I slid from the embrace of the bandage and beyond the reach of the scimitar. For the moment, at least, I was free. Free, and in the grasp of the Inquisition. I had scarcely stepped from my wooden bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison when the motion of the hellish machine ceased, and I beheld it drawn up by some invisible force through the ceiling. This was a lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free, I had but escaped death in one form of agony, to be delivered unto worse than death in some other. With that thought, I rolled my eyes nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual, some change which at first I could not appreciate distinctly. It was obvious had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes of a dreamy and trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period, I became aware, for the first time, of the origin of the sulphurous light which illuminated the cell. It proceeded from a fissure, about half an inch in width, extending entirely around the prison at the base of the walls, which thus appeared and were completely separated from the floor. I endeavored, but of course in vain, to look through the aperture. As I arose from the attempt, the mystery of the alteration in the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I have observed that although the outlines of the figures upon the walls were sufficiently distinct, yet the colors seemed blurred and indefinite. These colors had now assumed, and were momentarily assuming, a startling and most intense brilliancy that gave to the spectral and fiendish portraitures an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves than my own. Demon eyes of a wild and ghastly vivacity glared upon me in 1,000 directions where none had been visible before, and gleamed with the lurid luster of a fire that I could not force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal! Even while I breathed, there came to my nostrils the breath of the vapor of heated iron. A suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deeper glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the pictured horrors of blood. I panted. I gasped for breath. There could be no doubt of the design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting. Oh, most demoniac of men. I shrank from the glowing metal to the center of the cell. Amid the thought of the fiery destruction that impended, the idea of the coolness of the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to its deadly brink. I threw my straining vision below. The glare from the enkindled roof illuminated its inmost recesses, yet for a wild moment did my spirit refuse to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length it wrestled its way into my soul. It burned itself in upon my shuddering reason. Oh, for a voice to speak. Oh, horror. Oh, any horror but this. With a shriek, I rushed from the margin and buried my face in my hands, weeping bitterly. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked up, shuddering as with a fit of the ague. There had been a second change in the cell, and now the change was obviously in the form. As before, it was in vain that I, at first, endeavored to appreciate or understand what was taking place. But not long was I left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the king of terrors. The room had been square. I saw that two of its iron angles were now acute, two consequently obtuse. The fearful difference quickly increased with a low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant, the apartment had shifted its form into that of a lozenge. But the alteration stopped not here. I neither hoped nor desired it to stop. I could have clasped the red walls to my bosom as a garment of eternal peace. Death, I said, any death but that of the pit. Fool! Might I have not known that into the pit it was the object of the burning iron to urge me? Could I resist its glow? Or, if even that, could I withstand its pressure? And now, flatter and flatter grew the lozenge, with a rapidity that left me no time for contemplation. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me resistlessly onward. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tottered upon the brink. I averted my eyes. There was a discordant hum of human voices. There was a loud blast as of many trumpets. There was a harsh grating as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell, fainting into the abyss. It was that of General Lasalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. That's the end. By the way, with that reading done, I can now properly welcome Sinryu. Um, please help me with how you would like your name pronounced if you're still here. That was something. Um, yeah, that was something. You're right, Liliac. I don't know what that something was, but it was something. What terrible torture they rested upon this man. Poe, am I right? You are right. By the way, I need to give you VIP now that you've changed. Now that you have a different user. There you go. You have VIP now. You get a little gem badge beside your name when you talk. It's really cool. You know? Yeah, look at it. It's purple. It's pretty. I might have read parts of this before. I certainly don't remember it in depth, but this very much would appear to me, unless it's taking from some other story, this would appear to me to be the origin of basically cartoons often had this as a torture device in like probably the 80s, 90s, where someone would be tied up and there would be a blade on a pendulum hovering over them, slowly working its way downward. And while I'm not 100% sure, I bet this is the origin of that. Popular, popular culture comes from the wildest of places. Okay, I am going to take a drink. As a reminder, I am taking reading requests, but they have to be in the public domain, or they have to be CC0 licensed, or they have to be CC BY licensed. Oh, I just realized that Sinryu redeemed a hydrate and stretch, which is sorely needed. So I will also drink some water. is perhaps a shame that my mic is not going to pick up me cracking my back because that was so many bones. Aurora, did you ever decide on a chapter of Beowulf that you might like read? Yak, do you have anything you would like read? 'Cause I'm perfectly content to keep doing Poe. Biddy Bun Bunny, did I properly welcome you in today? I just noticed that you posting notification jump scare was your first message. ASMR story put me to sleep like I'm a baby. Are you saying it did or that you would like it to? Because if you're laying in bed and I read the next story, you're probably gonna fall asleep. It did. Did I wake you up talking? By the way, Moss, welcome in. I hope you're having a good day. You woke up naturally. Well, we will be reading more stories and more poems, so plenty of opportunities to put you back into a deep, restful sleep. That's sort of my goal. If you fall asleep, I win. You weren't even in bed, you fell asleep in your chair. That's fantastic. Obviously, my readings aren't perfect. You know, I stumble over a few words, especially ones that I have never seen before. I know that there are a couple words I pronounced 2 or 3 different ways in the previous reading. I actually want to look one of those up now that I'm remembering it. Serkingal? Serkingal? I don't know how to pronounce that, and I'm really curious now. Serkingal. Serkingal. Okay. The recusant. Recusant. Recus. Recusant. Some fun words. Inanition. Loss of vitality that results from lack of food and water. Inanition. Hard words to pronounce if you don't. Tenacity was a fun word. Oh, and moiety? I'm looking all these up. Moieties, right? Look at that. All right. As no one has offered any other suggested readings, I am going to move on to the Telltale Heart, something that I'm sure many of us have heard many times before. For those who maybe didn't catch one of the earlier reminders, while I am reading, I will not be acknowledging chat or follow events or redeems or anything, but I will do my very best to catch up with all of it once the reading is over. On that note, let's begin. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True, nervous, Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. On the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily, steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot out from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, louder and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder, louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God! No, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. Thank you, Not Future Lemon, for the subscription, the Prime subscription. Subscribing with Prime, as all epic gamers do. I appreciate it. I'm sorry it took me a while to respond to it, but as I think Lilyak pointed out, I do not acknowledge chat until I have finished the reading, just so that we can have it all together. Speaking of that Lemon Prime subscription, welcome in so many more people. Leo, welcome in. Moscow, welcome in. Jamie, welcome in. Let's see, did I miss anyone? I think I got you all. Welcome in. I hope you are doing well this evening. I am having a good time reading these post stories that I have not read in quite a long time indeed. Yes, Aurora, this current reading session is over. We're taking a quick break so I can chat and talk to everyone and drink some water. Let my voice rest just a little bit. Gosh, I don't know where I heard that story from, but I remember hearing it, and for a while it was creepy how familiar it sounded. I, yeah, I was about to get there. Uh, this is definitely a story that's often in an English class in was it middle or high school? What grade was this? 8 or 9? American literature, right? But they definitely go over Poe. I remember we had done The Telltale Heart. I think we had done The Raven, Cask of Amontillado. Um, the bells. I remember the bells too were in my textbook. He's usually covered every year, like Shakespeare. I get bored when they cover the same author every year. It's too much. I gotta hydrate and stretch redeem from Leo. I gotta get in. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Yeah, sure, it's different text, but it's the same with history. I only need to hear about the Holocaust so many times. It's just too much sometimes. It's too much. To be fair, it's understandable when it's like teaching a very specific lesson, but I don't remember any takeaways of that nature. But that could just be me. I was a terrible student. So I've got Before doing like chapters from books, I've got two more Poe stories queued up. I've got the Cask of Amontillado, and I've got the Raven. Everyone likes the Raven, but the Cask of Amontillado, pretty spoopy, pretty great. Chat, I know a lot of you weren't in here when I started. I know a lot of you weren't here for the last reading, like before the last in between reading sessions bit. So I am taking viewer requests tonight for any specific readings you might like. The caveat there is that they have to be in the public domain, or they have to be licensed CC0, or they have to be licensed Creative Commons with attribution. Playing on the lawful side of copyright law tonight. So, those are the limitations. That said, there have been requests for stuff like Beowulf. If it's a really big thing, like an epic or, anything like that, if you want to pick out maybe a specific chapter that you really like or really want to hear, I'm happy to do it. I wonder if we put Moss to sleep. Page 50. Aurora, is that about Beowulf? Are you talking about chapter 23, Beowulf's fight with Grendel's mother? I'm using Project Gutenberg, so that link is what I am thinking you are asking about. Yeah? All right. Before we go back into Poe, let's read a chapter of Beowulf. I feel it's very pertinent and necessary for me to say that there are some hard fucking words in Beowulf. I'm going to do my best, but especially names, I'm probably going to butcher. But here's the thing, I'm going to try to butcher them confidently so that the reading still comes out sensible. But, that's my warning. That's just how it's going to be. So here we go. Beowulf, chapter 23. Beowulf's fight with Grendel's mother. Beowulf spake, Ecgtheow's son. Recall now, O famous kinsman of Halfdan, prince very prudent, now to part I am ready. Gold friend of Earlman, what erst we agreed on, should I lay down my life in lending thee assistance, when my earth joys were over, thou wouldst evermore serve me. Instead of a father, my faithful Thanamin, my trusty retainers, protect thou and care for. Fall I in battle, and, Hrothgar beloved, send unto Hygelac the high-valued jewels thou to me hast allotted. The lord of the Geatmen may perceive from the gold, the Hrethling may see it when he looks on the jewels, that a gem giver found I, good over measure, enjoyed him while able. And the ancient heirloom unfurth permit thou, the famed one to have, the heavy sword splendid, the hard-edged weapon, with hrunting to aid me, I shall gain me glory, or grim death shall take me. The atheling of Geatman uttered these words, and heroic did hasten, not any rejoinder was willing to wait for. The wave current swallowed the doughty in battle. Then, a day's length elapsed ere he was able to see the sea at its bottom. Early she found then who 50 of winters the course of the currents kept in her fury. grisly and greedy that the Grim One's dominion, some one of men from above, was exploring. Forth did she grab them, grappled the warrior with horrible clutches, yet no sooner she injured, his body unscathed, the byrnie outguarded, that she proved but powerless to pierce through the armor. The limb mail locked with loath-grabbing fingers, the sea-wolf bare then, when bottomward came she, the ring prince homeward, that he after was powerless, he had daring to do it, to deal with his weapons. But many a mere beast tormented him swimming, flood beasts no few, with fierce biting tusks did break through his byrnie. The brave one pursued they. The earl then discovered he was down in some cavern where no water whatever unwise harmed him, and the clutch of the current could not anear him, since the roof tall prevented brightness. A gleaming firelight he saw, flashing resplendent. The good one saw then the sea bottom's monster, the mighty mare woman. He made a great onset with weapon of battle. His hand not desisted from striking. That war blade struck on her head then, a battle song greedy. The stranger perceived then the sword would not bite, her life would not injure, but the falchion failed the folk prince when straitened, erst had it often onsets encountered, oft cloven the helmet, the faded one's armor. 'Twas the first time that ever the excellent jewel had failed of its fame. Firm-mooded after, not heedless of valor, but mindful of glory, was Higlac's kinsman. The hero chief angry cast then his carved sword covered with jewels that it lay on the earth, hard and steel-pointed. He hoped in his strength, his hand grapple sturdy. So any must act whenever he thinketh to gain him in battle glory unending, and is reckless of living. The lord of the war geats, he shrank not from battle, seized by the shoulder the mother of Grendel. Then, mighty in struggle, swung he his enemy, since his anger was kindled, that she fell to the floor. With furious grapple she gave him requital early thereafter, and stretched out to grab him. The strongest of warriors faint-mooted stumbled, till he fell in his traces, foot-going champion. Then she sat on the hall guest and wielded her war knife wide-bladed, flashing, for her son would take vengeance, her one only bairn. His breast armor woven bowed on his shoulder, it guarded his life, the entrance defended 'gainst sword point and edges. Ectheo's son there had fatally journeyed, champion of Geatmen, in the arms of the ocean had the armor not given, close-woven corslet, comfort and succor, and had God most holy not awarded the victory, all-knowing Lord, easily did heaven's ruler most righteous arrange it with justice. Up rose he erect for battle. Hi Sparks, welcome in. We're doing readings tonight. How are you doing? Gotta say, Beowulf is hard to read. I feel like the translation that I'm reading is trying to be really close to the original and keeping it like line by line with what the original was. But man, I just cannot get the pacing down for these sentences. It is crazy. Settling in for the midweek grind. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wish you a good midweek grind. You don't understand it either. At least the link that I posted in chat has like little sections beside the paragraphs that sort of explains what's happening, which is a crazy thing to need for English. Like we have the paragraphs which are in English, and then we have beside it, this is what this paragraph actually means. I wonder if that's similar to how like learning old Japanese goes in Japanese schools. Jamie's English and real English, like even the English that this is in is translated from older English. Like there's a bunch of notes here about how they've translated the older English. Absolute absurdity. Sparks. I don't think you were here the last time I did my between story spiel, but I am taking viewer requests tonight. There are caveats. It has to be either in the public domain, it has to be licensed Creative Commons 0, or it has to be licensed Creative Commons Attribution, and I will be happy to read from it. That said, the next story that I think I'm going to read is Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. This looks like it's not as long as the Pendulum story was, but it is fairly long, so it will be a good bit before I start responding to chat or events again. So yeah, just as a warning, especially to those who weren't here during a between reading session before, good luck reading this out loud. Yeah. Poe has some hard words, but it'll be fine. But yeah, if you weren't here before, I don't respond to chat. I don't respond to subscriptions or follows or channel point redeems while I'm doing a reading. And that's mostly because I promised to make an MP3 of tonight, and it's looking like I'm going to make several, one of each story. And if I responded to chat, it would make that job so much harder to like pick that out between paragraphs or whatever. So I'm responding to chat between readings, and I will try to catch up and respond to everything that happened as long as it's relevant. On that note, I'm going to take a quick drink and then we will get started. Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged, This was a point definitely settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. I must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato. Although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared, he prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. You Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible! And in the middle of the carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." "Amontillado? I have my doubts. Amontillado, and I must satisfy them. Amontillado. As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucrezi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me, 'Lucrezi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry.' And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucrezi, I have no engagement. Come." "My friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with niter." "Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon, and as for Lucrezi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado." Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm and, putting on a mask of black silt and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. They took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and, giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," he said. "It is farther on," said I, "but observe the white web work which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rum of intoxication. "Niter?" he asked at length. "Niter," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said with decision, "we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucrece." "Enough," he said. "The cough's a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." "True, true," I replied, "and indeed I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps." Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. "Drink," I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled. "I drink," he said, "to the buried that repose around us." "And I to your long life." Again took my arm, and we proceeded. "These vaults," he said, "are extensive." "The Montresors," I replied, "were a great and numerous family." "I forget your arms." "A huge human foot d'or in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel." "And the motto?" "Nemo me impune lascit." "Good," he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. We had passed through long walls of piled skeletons, with casks and puncheons intermingling into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. "The niter," I said. "See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough—" "It is nothing," he said. "Let us go on, but first another draught of the Medoc." I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. "You do not comprehend?" he said. "Not I," I replied. "Then you are not of the Brotherhood." "How?" "You are not of the Masons." "Yes, yes," I said. "Yes, yes." "You? Impossible. A Mason?" "A Mason," I replied. "A sign," he said. "A sign." "It is this," I answered, producing from beneath the folds of my roquelaire a trowel. "You jest," he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. "But let us proceed to the Amontillado." "Be it so," I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another, less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th side, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior crypt or recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucrezi—" "He is an ignoramus," interrupted my friend as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche and, finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall. You cannot help feeling the niter. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return." "No? Then I must positively leave you, but I must first render you all the little attentions in my power." "The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied, "the Amontillado." As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused and, holding the flambeau over the masonwork, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position, but now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "A very good joke indeed, an excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over our wine. The Amontillado," I said. "Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said, let us be gone. For the love of God, Montresor. Yes, I said, for the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato? No answer. I called again, Fortunato? No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescant. So that, my lovely chat, is the Cask of Amontillado. Hi ZZ, welcome in. I hope you are having a good time, a good night, a good time zone. It's hard to know these days. Little Yak, frankly, I am surprised that you are still awake. We'll probably do one more story before the ending of tonight. I'm fine. I'll speak about going to bed at some point soon, though. For sure, for sure. And I mean, I have to go to bed as well. I think we might have so pleasant a time as to end with the raven. Now, my wife had a fun idea for the raven, which was to try to end it at the very end, to end stream at the very end. With that in mind, I am going to try to find another stream to raid when I'm done. And I'm going to try to make that happen because I think that will be very satisfying. Now, since I'm going to do that, we are going to have to get some things out of the way right now. Primarily, I got to talk about just regular ending announcement stuff. So, if you're not following me on socials, you should really do that. Discord is my primary social at this point in time. The Discord server is excellent. I highly recommend joining it, and just for chatting, for pictures, for ideas, seeing the schedules for the next week come up, etc. We also, I should have just pushed this button to begin with. There are also the raid messages. When we raid into the next channel, I would really appreciate it if you copy and pasted one of the raid messages. I have picked out a channel to raid for when we're done with the story, and it is another reading stream, which is sort of That's what I want to try to keep us in, right? Yeah, of course. We are going to end on one more story, of course. Um, I am doing a quick look for a backup, but I don't see any backup. Like everything else in the ASMR is the weird type of ASMR. So there is a very good chance that my entire plan will fall apart. We'll have to wait and see. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's end on a high note. Let's read The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, "tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven. ghastly grim and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust upon his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word did he outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, Doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking Nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lighting with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Be that word our sign in parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted never more.